All right, ladies and gentlemen, good afternoon. This meeting will come to order. This is the regular meeting of the Land Use Transportation Committee. I'm Supervisor Malia Cohen, chair of this committee, and to my right is Supervisor Scott Wiener, who is the vice chair, and to my left is Supervisor Kim. Our clerk today is Mr. Victor Young, and I'd like to say a special thank you to Jim Smith and Leo D'Assis from SF TV for their broadcasting this meeting. Mr. Clerk, do you have any announcements?
Yes, please silence all electronic devices. Completed speaker cards and copies of any documents to be included as part of the file should be submitted to the clerk. Items acted upon today will appear on the October 20th, 2015 Board of Supervisors agenda unless otherwise stated.
All right, thank you so much. Could you please call item number 1?
Item number 1 is an ordinance amending the planning code to correct errors, reenact previously existing language that was repealed in error as part of Article 2 Reorganization Ordinance, update the code, and make non-substantive language revisions to simplify and clarify text.
Thank you very much. I believe we are going to hear from Aaron Starr from the Planning Department, who will be presenting on this item. Welcome.
Is this on? Oh, there we go. Thank you very much, Supervisors. Aaron Starr, Manager of Legislative Affairs for the Planning Department. As stated, this is a code corrections ordinance to reenact previously existing language that was repealed in errors as part of Article 2 to correct code errors, to update code language, and to make non-substantive language revisions to simplify and clarify text. The Planning Commission heard this item on August 13th of this year and voted unanimously to recommend approval. The amendments that the Planning Commission recommended were already added into the ordinance before today. It's a pretty straightforward piece of legislation, so my presentation is short, but if you have any questions, I'm happy to answer them.
Okay, thank you. Colleagues, I don't know if there's any discussion from you all on this item. If not, we can open up to public comment at this time. Public comment is open.
Thank you, sir. Thank you, madam. Filling up the galaxy with sun, moon, stars, and planet are one's original love affair in true relationship. Thus, one should treasure. While one look at being wealthy CEO and Nobel Mayor or Nobel Prize winner for one's worldly fame and financial training status or well-beings. I actually enjoy being with my girlfriend more than wasting my time on stage show for receiving the Nobel Prize medal and set money. I prefer my acting play for truthful having destiny against worldly way of human destiny. Self in being witty and funny for my daily missionary pathway of quick joy with true success. Being smart one works on lucky aspect, realistic as daily matters, while foolish person works the other way, being in danger of all. Everyone should self in critical reasoning of success, of value, time transit for oneself. Of later in life, everything of intuition in way of thinking falsehood, all end up being wrong. Special support for heavenly sun, moon, star, planet onto oneself or one's body self of spiritual force at work, removal of tragic force of fortification. Two gentlemen of loyal statement being leading on their life perfectly at ease of chauvinist, having way of speech and this being outrageous with proper measure, so is see style, beauty of fine art, or complete fulfillment to be ultimate upon cultivation, achieving high levels of heaven and earth, those functioning, upon recovery back to oneness of ultimate holy, all ancestor, in way extend to the final boundary of universal whole, special path of body form at heart of destiny for one's true self-nature, a way of harmless physical nature for turning flow and showing true force of quick mind, achieving oneness.
Is there any other public comment on item 1? All right, seeing none, public comment is closed at this time. Thank you very much. Colleagues, may I have a motion on this item? Thank you. There was a motion to move with a positive recommendation by Supervisor Kim. Without objection, this motion passes unanimously. Thank you very much. Mr. Clerk, could you please call item number 2?
Item number 2 is a resolution imposing interim zoning controls in the Transit Center District Plan area, which is bounded by Market Street on the north, Folsom Street on the south, Stewart Street on the east, and between New Montgomery and 3rd Street on the west, and in the area boundaries by Folsom, Harrison, Essex, and 2nd Street, but excluding the planned rooftop park between Mission, Howard, 2nd, and Beale Streets, and those portions of the plan area included in Zone 1 of the Trans-Bay Redevelopment Plan.
Thank you very much. Now, Supervisor Kim is the author of this item, and she'll offer some remarks.
Thank you. We're actually still in negotiations with the stakeholders that are involved in this interim sun control, so I'd like to make a request to continue for 2 weeks.
All right. A motion was made to request to continue this item till 2 weeks, till October 19th, to the next land use meeting. And without objection, this motion passes. Thank you. Oh, let's take public comment. Excuse me. I'm sorry. Let's go back for a moment. Let's take public comment on item 2. All right. Seeing no public comment. Public comment is closed. Thank you. There was a motion made by Supervisor Kim to continue this item to October 19th, and that motion passes unanimously. All right. Thank you, Mr. Clerk. Now, could you please call item number 3?
Item number 3 is an ordinance amending the planning code by establishing a new citywide transportation sustainability fee and suspending applications of the existing transit impact development fee as long as the transportation sustainability fee remains operative.
Thank you very much. Colleagues, now this is a continuation of our previous hearings and discussion on this item. I understand that we have staff here from the planning, from MTA, and MTA who are here to answer questions, and Ms. Victoria Wise, who would like to make an announcement. So why don't we have Victoria speak? Is Victoria at the MTA? Okay, well, let's let the director speak, and then we'll come back to you. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Chair, members of the committee. I want to thank you for the time that you're taking in considering this item. I guess I just wanted to reinforce a few things. The measure that was introduced by the mayor along with the planning department and the MTA was the result of a considerable amount of work, literally over the course of many years. It was analysis, both the Nexus study and the fiscal feasibility study, but even more so, lots of discussions with lots of different stakeholders, trying to incorporate feedback, trying to run numbers, trying to find, I think as somebody said last week, kind of the sweet spot of what's the right level to set these fees, what's the right way to assess them, what are the right uses upon which to assess them. We at the MTA certainly have a vested interest in generating as much revenue as we possibly can, but we want to make sure that in the context of all the other fees that the city assesses, that in the cost of doing business that we have here in the city, that we're going about this in the most thoughtful and deliberate way. The work that was done, I believe, got to what was, I think, a very strong proposal. There were certainly people on different sides who thought this was too high or this was too low or there was too much grandfathering or too little. We took all of that feedback and came up with the final product that was presented for you. I understand there are legitimate questions about some of those dimensions, what's covered, whether the fees are at the right level, what sort of grandfathering or other exemptions being added or subtracted, and I respect that. I know you had a number of questions last week at Land Use Committee, and I believe the staff, particularly the planning staff, has worked hard to get you the answers to those questions. They're here along with staff from the MTA and the Transportation Authority, ready to answer any other questions you have, provide any other information. If there are some things that need to adjust a little bit one way or another, of course, that's certainly the arena for the Board of Supervisors to weigh in. But I did want to just reinforce that there was a lot of work, both analytical work and stakeholder work, that we brought together, that our staff brought together over the course of many years to get to a comprehensive product. And I'm just hopeful that without too much undoing of that years of work, that we can get to consensus within City Hall on the right package and move it forward. So I just want to kind of honor and reflect all the many years of hard work that was done to try to get the best possible package together, understanding that different folks have some different ideas on certain elements of the package. But the staff are all here ready to answer any questions, provide any information, and want to just thank you for giving us the opportunity.
Thank you. Thank you for your hard work. Ms. Wise, do you want to introduce the lineup?
Members of the board, Victoria Wise, Chief of Staff of the Sustainable Streets Division of the MTA. Director Riskin actually covered much of what I was going to say, but I just wanted to add that in addition to MTA and CTA staff, we also have staff here from the Department of Public Health, and we also have Sifel Consulting here, the consultancy that prepared the feasibility analysis. So with that, we're ready to answer any questions or provide any clarifications in the materials we sent to you last week that covered some of the key issues that you discussed, like grandfathering, like both secondary educational institution and hospital exemptions, and questions around feasibility, particularly around elimination of the plan area fee credit, increase of the fee, and also potential tiering of the fee depending on different criteria. So thank you.
Thank you. So I have a few opening remarks that I will go ahead and jump into. I will not reiterate all of my comments from our last meeting, but I have had the opportunity to communicate and talk to many of the stakeholders as well as city staff about this legislation. And I do want to acknowledge the hard work that the mayor's office has put into putting together a consensus piece of legislation. The hard work on this matter is in no way negated by our discussion. I think is only fair as we as legislators have an opportunity to weigh in and add our voice to a piece of legislation. And so as I have previously mentioned, San Francisco is growing at an incredibly rapid rate. And much of this growth is occurring in the city's southeastern neighborhoods. And developing housing in our city is critically important, especially at a time when there's housing crisis. However, the infrastructure that supports this growth is critical to the livability and the health of our neighborhoods. This committee has heard me time and time again articulate the challenges that we've been developing, the challenges that we have with developing infrastructure in the eastern neighborhoods to serve this new growth. We need to really get this right, and I believe that we can thoughtfully increase some of the impact fees without discouraging much of the needed development. Now, colleagues, I have circulated a few amendments for your consideration. The first one is the removal of the plan area credit. Now, the first amendment is to remove the plan area credit, which is on page 8, beginning on line 3. This will modestly increase the fee and keep the dollars in the neighborhood where the development is happening, thereby relieving the strain on our transportation system. It will potentially generate approximately $1.1 million per year. I've heard that removing this credit will mean developers no longer will pursue projects in these planned areas, and I have to respectfully disagree. I think the removal of this credit in some instances results in an increase. The removal of this credit in some instances results in an increase of as little as 97 cents. And these are the areas which have all accepted most of the city's development and that are also in the most dire need of infrastructure improvement. The second amendment that I have proposed is an amendment to increase the threshold for PDR exemption from 800 ground square feet to 1,500 ground square feet. This policy is a priority for myself and will generate only a negligible amount of money, but I believe it is consistent with our previous PDR policies that we have taken. The third amendment that I'm proposing, as I stated last week, I believe hospitals should be prepared to pay some fee for their impacts on our city. Now, while we appreciate the charity care work that our hospitals are doing, our hospitals network generates a significant number of trips and has a significant impact on our transportation system. And I've asked the Hospital Council to work with my office on developing a standard that reflects their unique situation. However, they have not been able to come forward with a substantive suggestion. So this amendment would remove the exemption for hospitals. I believe these large trip generators should pay their fair share. And I also remain open to discussing an alternative proposal in the absence of that feedback from the hospitals. I believe that we need to make a statement that these entities pay their fair share. So I will I see Supervisor Kim's name on the... Okay, all right. We'll look to Supervisor Rayner if he has any comments that he'd like to share at this time.
Sure. Thank you very much, Madam Chair. And I won't go into the same level of detail I went into last week, but just to briefly recap, I'm very excited about this legislation going forward, and as often happens with major legislation, we can sometimes quibble about this detail or that detail, but I think it's important not to miss the forest for the trees. The big picture here is that for the very first time in the history of San Francisco, transit impact development fees will apply to residential development. This ordinance, or the predecessor ordinance, the Transit Impact Development Fee Ordinance, or TIDF, has been on the books for approximately 35 years. It's never applied to residential. That was I think, an omission in the adoption of that ordinance, but I also know that sometimes these things happen in steps. And the fact is that we do have an enormous amount of residential development happening in San Francisco. That is something that I have supported because we need more housing in San Francisco. But we also know that when we have more residential development in the city, as important as that is, it does have impacts. And so as a result, we have impact fees that we impose on residential development around affordable housing, around various other needs, and it is an omission that residential development does not pay transit impact fees, because when you're bringing more people into an area, there will be impacts on the transportation system, including auto trips and also crowding or increased ridership on public transportation. And it's important for development to help pay for these needs, not to pay for it on their own. And the lion's share of our transit system, of course, is funded by the taxpayers. But this is a very important step forward. I also will note that we went through this process in a more limited form 3 years ago when I authored the renewal of the TIDF. We had some real fights back then, particularly around whether hospitals should be exempt from the transit impact development fee. I took the position and fought very hard to remove the exemption for hospitals from the transit impact development fees in 2012. I fought the good fight and lost badly. It was a 9-2 vote at the Board of Supervisors. The only member of the Board of Supervisors who voted with me in support of removing the hospital exemption was former Supervisor Carmen Chu, and I want to thank her for standing with us in that rout that we suffered. When we move forward with the TSP, with the current ordinance before us, I kept in mind that message that the Board of Supervisors had sent loud and clear, where 9 people voted not to or to keep the hospital exemption. And so as a result, we worked with the hospitals to extend the exemption through their seismic retrofit state-mandated deadline, or at 2030 or so. And and I and others agreed with the hospitals on that extended exemption. I was then surprised to learn that I had a number of colleagues who voted to keep the hospital exemption 3 years ago and are now advocating to remove the hospital exemption. That is fine. Everyone is entitled to have their viewpoint evolve over time, and I'm not in any way critical of that. I wish that we had all been together in removing this exemption 3 years ago, but that's life. But I'm going to stand by the agreement that I reached with the hospitals before we introduced this legislation to extend their exemption through the seismic retrofit state-mandated deadline, and that's why I will not be supporting the removal of the hospital exemption today, although I may be in the minority on that. There are a few other amendments that I am offering today, which I'll describe now, and I know we'll take up after public comment. The first is I don't think that student housing that's being built by nonprofit universities should be subject to transit impact fees. We have a dramatic shortage of student housing in San Francisco. It has very, very negative impacts in terms of students who simply can't find a place to live in the city and have to live in their cars or have to have long commutes to get into the city just to go to college. I authored several years ago student housing legislation to try to remove some of the obstacles and make it cheaper and easier for universities to build their own housing instead of just tossing their students into the general housing pool. And we want universities to build more student housing. Student housing, even before any of us was on the board, the previous Board of Supervisors exempted student housing entirely from the inclusionary housing ordinance. Student housing projects do not have to pay any affordable housing fees, again, in order to make it as inexpensive as possible for universities to build student housing. So I don't think that we should be applying transit impact fees to student housing that is being built by nonprofit universities, and so I'll be offering an amendment to that effect. I will also be offering an amendment. We've had a lot of, a minor amendment around the requirement to perform an economic feasibility study. Right now, the ordinance requires one every 5 years, and then this amendment would change it to every 3 years. And then I want to hear what the proposals are in terms of, I know that there will be a proposal to increase the per square footage transit impact fee assessed, and also perhaps around grandfathering. And so once those are proposed, I may have some thoughts on that because I have some ideas about how to approach that in a way to, I think, accomplish a lot of our goals while also respecting the need to have feasible projects. And then finally, I just want to note that, and I mentioned this briefly last week, that transit impact development fees, as important as they are a tiny, tiny piece of the funding puzzle for our massive transit needs here in San Francisco over the coming decades. What the total amount that we're going to get from these fees pales in comparison to the needs that we have, and those are largely going to come from taxpayers and from various ballot measures that have been moving forward and that will move forward. So whatever we do today, let's keep in mind the big picture, that I hope that the people who are cheerleading the hardest to try to increase what developers have to pay for transit impact fees are equally or more passionate when it comes to making hard resource allocation decisions of public money and making sure that we are actually investing in our transportation systems, because that is what's going to decide whether we have a transit system that meets the needs of our city in the future. Thank you.
Supervisor Kim. Supervisor Avalos.
Why don't you go ahead? Thank you, Chair Cohen. First off, I was here last week, and I want to reiterate my comments from that time. First off, I want to thank the MTA and planning and the mayor's office and the development community for coming together on the TSF. That there was a lot of work that was done in crafting the legislation that's before us today. And I think it's very significant, especially setting the precedent of how we're going to be collecting fees on development and how development can help pay for and cover transportation costs in San Francisco. Last week I offered a number of ideas that I've been circulating for potential amendments. Some of them have been talked about here today. I know we heard very clearly from Ed Riskin from the MTA about all the work that's been done in establishing the fee as is. And I understand also that within City Hall and city departments, there still has been a lot of discussion about what is the right way to calibrate these fees. So I see that the decision that's come together, the deal that was made in the mayor's office with the development community and the mayor was a deal that was made. But now we're in the legislative process where we have a public place to discuss what is the proper way or what is a good way to calibrate these fees. And now it's in our hands. And I want to make sure that we are hearing clearly from the people who worked on establishing the fee and what the rationale was, what is feasible for developments of different sizes to absorb in a new fee, and to have that guide us in our decision making here while we're actually setting the final fees here at City Hall in the board chamber. So here are the different ideas I have in place for amendments that I may be sitting in for Supervisor Kim, who has to leave earlier or later in the meeting today before we finish. So I might be adding these actual amendments myself. I agree with the exemption for eliminating the elimination of the area plan exemptions. I agree with eliminating the hospital exemptions as well, and looking at an overall tiered structure for the TSF that is based on residential and non-residential and the size of the projects in the residential and non-residential. And I'll be passing out my colleagues here details for that after public comment. I also want to look at how we can do grandfathering of residential and non-residential as well, based on July 1st of 2014, and also the introduction date for the new TSF that was July 21st of this year. So that'll be looking at grandfathering for residential and non-residential. I also have a concern about how watching from the perspective of District 11 and the southern part of San Francisco, where we haven't really seen a very equitable way of sharing the resources of development in that part of San Francisco, how we can look forward to having a study between the planning department and the controller's office, how to make feasible a tiered approach that will help create incentives for development in parts of San Francisco that see development happening in single-family homes, providing in-law apartments for dwellers rather than actual housing and office space and commercial space that's going to be transforming neighborhoods for the future. So I'd like to see that come in place as well, be offering an amendment that way, in that direction, moving forward. So those are my opening comments, and again, I want to thank Mayor's Office and Planning Department, MTA, for all of their work so far, and look forward to the discussion here and at the full Board of Supervisors about the TSF.
Thank you very much, Supervisor Kim.
Thank you. Just in case I'm not able to make it through public comment, I did want to move forward my position on the TSF, and of course also recognize the staff at SFMTA and the Planning Department, as well as everyone that has been working on this updated TSF. It is much needed, and it has certainly been going on for many years. I also want to clarify that when this amended version came before the full Board of Supervisors 2 years ago, the reason why a number of us voted against it wasn't because we were against any particular exemption or non-exemption like the nonprofit hospitals, but because there were actually a number of groups that were included initially, including nonprofit affordable housing, Catholic schools. I think every single member of this board had a variety of different reasons as to why they voted against that version, and we wanted more time to have a continued discussion about who really should be paying for TSF and who shouldn't be. And therefore, I think every category was really left open in terms of where individual supervisors would stand, including nonprofit hospitals. But I think there's some agreement amongst committee members around a number of different things. I think that at this point, I do support eliminating the plan area credit, being that it looks that this is the area where we are increasing density and growth, and we certainly should ensure that we are investing in the public transit, pedestrian, and bike safety needs of these growing neighborhoods. Second, looking at, as Supervisor Avalos mentioned, and I'll be supportive of this, is creating a two-tiered structure for residential. So keeping buildings of 99 units and under at the current proposed fee and raising it just by $1 for 100 units and above. For non-residential, I think that looking at balancing both the fiscal feasibility study and the Nexus study, I think we can significantly raise commercial non-residential fees by $3 for large projects, and I would be supportive of that. I also support the tiered grandfathering of residential and non-residential as proposed by Supervisor Avalos. I certainly think that any developments that have submitted after July 21st should pay 100% of TSF as the ordinance had been introduced on that day. As Supervisor Wiener mentioned, I am also supportive of excluding nonprofit higher education institutions that have to submit an IMP. I think that it is a very small category of institutions that are in that grouping, and in the particular case of the entity that will be most impacted, I think it's a positive that they're building student housing on site, and actually in many cases probably reducing the load on transit because students can stay on campus and go to class and go to their programs, and that's actually the city moving forward in a positive direction. And so those are some of my quick thoughts. I think a lot went into this, and these amendments in no way counter, I think, the good work that's been done with the years of negotiation of bringing this proposal forward to us. I think this board really wants to ensure that we are advocating for the highest possible fees that are feasible for all of our developers and our stakeholders in balancing the needs of our residents in this growing city. And so, if anything, we're really trying to improve I think what already exists and ensure that SFMTA and planning are getting the resources that they need to make the city truly work. Thank you.
Thank you. At this time, I think we should go to public comment. I've got several. Mr. Yip, I'm going to call you up last. I've got several public comment cards that are ahead. Okay. First, I'd like to call up Charlie Cross, Brian Cahill, David Serrano-Sewell, Abby Yant, Sister Mary Kilgriff, Stuart Fong, John Gressman, Melissa White. Okay, Charlie Cross.
Thank you, Supervisors. My name is Charles Cross. I'm Vice President at USF. Numerous people have spoken in the last couple of weeks on behalf of USF, and I simply want to summarize the issues from USF's perspective. USF has been exempt from the past fees as a result of our charitable designation. That exemption is disappearing in the proposed legislation, although modified now, so thank you. USF has many projects on the horizon, including student housing expansion and academic space. Housing is one of our biggest challenges, as it is for the entire city. We're hoping to build housing in a couple of phases, plus an additional couple 100,000 square feet of offices and classrooms and ancillary space to support that increased residential load. All of this ancillary space is to accommodate displaced functions or to accommodate the added residential load. The cost for the TSF for all these could top $8 million. These costs are significant for USF. USF's residential building plans will have a beneficial impact on the city and its transportation network. USF is limiting its growth on the Hilltop campus and is hoping to build housing to accommodate our current student body size. About 35% of USF undergraduates reside on campus and the balance live in the neighborhoods in market rate housing. We're working to provide housing on campus, relocating students from those neighborhoods and lessening the impact on the city's infrastructure. USF was the first higher education institution to enter into an agreement with Muni to purchase Muni student passes for all of our students. This program has been in place for over a decade and provides Muni with about $1.6 million annually from USF. USF provides transportation subsidies for all of our employees that use public transit. We respectfully request that USF continue to be exempted from the TSF as proposed by Supervisors Wiener and Kim. Thank you for your consideration.
Madam Chair and members, I'm Brian Cahill, former Executive Director of Catholic Charities and a former member of the Board of Directors of St. Mary's Medical Center. And I think I understand the crucial role that nonprofit health and human service organizations play in our community. In the case of St. Mary's, that service and charity care has been available since the Sisters of Mercy arrived over 150 years ago. If nonprofit hospitals are subject to this fee, which is really no different than a tax, it will directly impact their capacity to serve the community, and I think undermine the charitable purpose of these hospitals in the area of charity care and also in a variety of partnerships with city government and other community organizations. I'd like to give you one example from my personal experience. Prior to my hiring by the Board of Catholic Charities in 2000, the agency had been struggling with a leadership crisis and significant indebtedness. On my first day on the job, I was told the lease for our office space would be up in 2 months. We could not afford the market rate rent that we were facing. St. Mary's Medical Center found out about our situation, offered us a space at a discounted rate at the old St. Mary's Hall on Hay Street. We stayed there for 3 years. We got our house in order, and we got back to serving the poor and the vulnerable and the marginalized. we could not have made that recovery without St. Mary's help. And if a form of transportation sustainability fee had been in place then, I don't think they would have been able to help us. Imposing this fee on nonprofit hospitals will degrade their healthcare mission, and I think imposing this fee is not consistent with the rich historical relationship between nonprofits and city government. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Cahill. Next speaker, please.
Madam Chair, honorable members of the committee, and thank you to Mr. Cahill for testifying today on behalf of the not-for-profit hospitals. There's no greater community champion than Mr. Cahill and what he does every day, and through that partnership with the not-for-profit hospitals. We did seek to engage in a dialogue around what can be done, because hospitals do not want to shirk their responsibility. The challenge we have with respect to the Nexus study is there's what we view as some fundamental questions, namely, there is the employee ratio is off. We know the employee ratio at hospitals is a bigger number than that identified in the Nexus study. The economic feasibility study, which purports to comment on the impact on an industry, the fee impact on an industry, did 10 prototypes for development, and not a single hospital is in the mix. So it ignores the state's seismic requirements that mandate a larger footprint with the same number of trips. That has been one of our issues with this ordinance. It just doesn't understand that net new construction can mean the same number of employees, hospital beds, and trips. Thank you.
Good afternoon, Supervisors. Abby Yant, Dignity Health, St. Francis Memorial Hospital. I just wanted to reiterate that we would like you to support the amendment as written regarding the hospital exemption. I think it never ceases to amaze me how we don't understand the way that the healthcare dollar is our dollar. The increases in cost to the hospital, we pay through our insurance premiums. These are not-for-profit hospitals. The money is not spinning off and going to Wall Street. It's going back into the capital construction and the technology and the capital appetite of our hospitals, which is tremendous. I mean, electronic health records, we're on the verge of having to convert to a whole new system of electronic health records. There's other things that are just driving the technology cost and the capital cost for hospitals that we must absorb and to keep the institutions going. So when we add on infrastructure fees such as transportation, that will go back into the mix, and the only way that we get money is through insurance premiums. There's no other source of revenue for hospitals. And as the city who uses insurance for its current employees and retirees, that cost will be passed on to the city. So there will be no net gain for the city. The city will be continuing to pay those dollars through the insurance fees that it pays for its employees. So it's a little bit of a shell game, and I think we really have to think that through, because we may be believing that we're going to get additional revenue when indeed we're not, because it's going out the other way. So thank you.
Madam Chair and Supervisors, I'm Sister Mary Kilgariff, Liaison for Community Health at St. Mary's Medical Center. In 1854, Archbishop Alemany invited the Sisters of Mercy to San Francisco to do one thing: to visit the dying patients in the city's first county hospital, the Marine State Hospital. At the time, it was located at the corner of Stockton and Vallejo. Today, all hospitals in San Francisco, and we are blessed to have such unbelievable medical experts and care provided for the people of San Francisco, but all hospitals provide spiritual care. And at Dignity Health, this program has been elevated to a pastoral clinical education certificate program which trains patients' visitors. The clinic at St. Mary's, the psych unit at St. Francis, and all of the hospitals have a student and a chaplain that visit them in their surrounding. 2 days ago, on Saturday, October 3rd, St. Mary's, along with Kaiser and UC, participated in the annual Southeast Commission Family Health Fair. One of the obligations of the hospitals in San Francisco is to not only take care of the people who come to their hospital as patients, but to take care of the communities they are in. St. Mary's provided diabetes risk survey and also stroke prevention health education. All of these healthcare services show the commitment of the hospitals to focus on the total person, body, mind, and spirit. Please help us so that we can continue to do this work and to vote also, if I may, on keeping the exemption for not-for-profit hospitals. Thank you.
Thank you. Next speaker.
Good afternoon, supervisors. My name is Stuart Fong. I participate in community health outreach for Chinese Hospital. Chinese Hospital works together with all the other hospitals in San Francisco, and we work collaboratively in many projects such as SF Hep B Free, neighborhood health issues, and I think it's important that the hospitals continue to work together, providing awareness, education, screening, as Sister Mary had alluded to, in the health fairs. In addition, the fees could jeopardize any collaborative or participation in community efforts. Hospitals always are working together, and we need to continue that work together. So please support the exemption for hospitals. Thank you.
Thank you. Next speaker.
Hi, good afternoon, Madam Chair and Supervisors. Melissa White with Sutter Health. Just wanted to reiterate whatever all my colleagues have said. You know, through Sutter's development agreement, it took many, many years. And with that, and with the negotiations with the MTA and with the Board of Supervisors in the city, that came up with a close to a $16.4 million pay throughout the 10 years of the development agreement. Money going towards public safety, BRT, and other bicycle studies. And so I ask you to hold on and to hold the fee and work with all the other hospitals. Thank you.
Thank you. Next speaker, please.
Madam Chair, Board of Supervisors, John Gressman, San Francisco Community Planning Consortium. I, too, will not repeat what I requested last week. What I would remind the Board of Supervisors is charity care and community benefits are really critical. If we do anything that takes money away from these viable programs, our uninsured, our low-income patients will have to suffer the agony of increased hospital pricing. I understand, or we, the consortium, Board of Directors, understand the importance of having the transit fee, but not at the expense of the health and welfare of our low-income patients. Charity care is the way that many of our patients pay for their emergency room visits and for inpatient care. Community benefit is the way we create new programs. Several years ago, in collaboration with the hospitals, we did a specialty care program that saw over 2,000 people in care. Operation Access every year draws on community benefits. We thank you, and we ask that the hospitals be exempt.
Thank you. Mr. Yip, I haven't called you yet, sir, but I would like to call up Mr. Peter Cohen, Ken Cleveland, Peter Strauss, Tim Colin, Jim Lazarus, Kathy DeLuca, and then Mr. Yip.
Good afternoon, Supervisors. Good to see you again. Peter Cohen, Council of Community Housing Organizations. What I hear today sounds like good movement. A number of very sensible amendments that you discussed last week, and I think generally support all of them in combination. As we mentioned last week, as did a number of other advocates, it's really a question of how much revenue we're going to be able to get from the TSF fee toward the total cost of transportation needs, which is at this point an unfunded number of $3.3 billion. As Supervisor Wiener said, the lion's share for funding is going to fall on the taxpayers, and that's absolutely true. So the fee as it is proposed is roughly 23% of the total cost or nexus, which means the other 77% comes from taxpayers in combination of the general fund or bonds or sales taxes. So this is really about what a fair balance is. So we do encourage you to increase that fee level. If the proposal for $1 is where it is, then that's where it is. I would also say that it's very smart to think about tiering development, not just for TSF, but thinking about your other types of development impact fees. Not all development is the same. I think you understand that intuitively. And even in the feasibility study, it shows 10 different typologies of development, 8 of which are residential, 2 are commercial. And as we move forward and starting to think about how different scales of a small, medium, and large size development, whether it's commercial or residential, can absorb different fees, supervisors, I would suggest that's how you can really find the sweet spot that applies appropriately to different types of development and not assume it's the same for all of them. So it's a good step in the right direction. Encourage you to maybe even parse it out even further than 2 tiers. Thank you.
Good afternoon, Supervisors. Ken Cleveland, representing the commercial real estate industry here in the city and commercial developers. We've been reached out to for a long time by SFMTA, and so first off, I'd want to thank the director and the people on staff at SFMTA for really reaching out to our community with regards to these fee increases. As you know, what's being proposed in the package from SFMTA is about a 22% increase on new commercial development. And we accept that. We would absolutely categorically reject, Supervisor, with all due respect, Supervisor Kim's 50% increase in the transit impact fees for commercial development. That is onerous. You have to keep in mind that commercial development, it doesn't just pay transit fees. It pays a lot of other kinds of fees for parks, open space, public art, just to name a few, housing. There's all kinds of fees that go into new commercial development. So transit is just simply one of those fees. I think you also should remember that right now we're blessed with a very, very low unemployment. All the union halls are empty of their workers because they're out on the jobs being paid good wages and stimulating our local economy. Every building that goes up in San Francisco is adding value to the city's tax base. We shouldn't forget that, and we shouldn't discourage that. So that's my proposal. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Next speaker.
Good afternoon, Supervisors. I'm Peter Strauss from the San Francisco Transit Riders. And I'm going to just focus on a couple of key points this afternoon. First of all, please remember, this is a fee. This is not a tax. We are just seeking to recover the expenses that development imposes on the city, and a small portion at that. Secondly, as Peter Cohen also mentioned, and we've mentioned before, this is a revenue measure, and as such, one thing that the feasibility analysis suggests, is that a nuanced structure, presumably with tiers, is able to recover as much as $25 million or more in cash flow without interfering with the ability of the development community to serve our city. We ask you to remember that we would like to seek a floor of at least $20 million coming out of this in cash flow. We believe that is feasible and fair. Transportation is a bipartisan issue, and I think it's very encouraging the progress you've been making in the last week, all of you. And I'm very hopeful and optimistic that you can come together on a proposal that shares a recommendation that conforms to these parameters. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Mr. Colon.
Good afternoon, Commissioners, or since elevated to Supervisors. Tim Colon on behalf of the San Francisco Housing Action Coalition. And we've gotten the presentations from MTA and planning over the years, and our members are strongly in favor of the idea of development funding better transit. There's no argument there. And I'll find myself agreeing with my friend Peter Cohen. The Housing Action Coalition supports a fee level that maximizes the revenue to the city. Unlike him, perhaps, we think that the study, the economic feasibility analysis that Seifel did, sets that. That's going to be the rate that will maximize revenues to the city, and that's the right thing to do. The idea that you can sort of willy-nilly just say, let's pick a number, we'll raise it, and the city's going to get more revenue that way, is not how it works. And as an example, just to put this in scale, last week, quick study after the first hearing, I got responses from 6 projects of the total city fee load, the exaction and fee loads they're paying, and across different housing types in different areas of the city. And the fees that the city is charging, that might be shorthand for city taxes, are running $95, $110, $120, in one case over $130,000 per door. And I think a lot of what we're doing, as Mr. Cleveland said, we've got a great economy going right now, but we're going on a wing and a prayer that somehow this is going to continue, and that new residents, not developers, new residents are going to want to pay $110,000, $120,000, $130,000 a door in new taxes on it. And I just think that it really risks the feasibility. If certainly the projects on the margin that are smaller scale, lower cost construction outside of the urban core, on the margin, it's harder to build those projects. And those are the ones we want to see go ahead in particular. So I would urge you to stick with what the economic feasibility analysis shows. Thank you.
Thank you. Next speaker.
Good afternoon, Supervisors. I'm Kathy DeLuca. I'm the Policy and Program Manager with Walk San Francisco. I'm here to express our support for the Transportation Sustainability Program and for the fee. While we think the program is a fantastic way to move forward, we would like to see some modifications to the fee to make it more robust, to really ensure that the city can provide funding that will create a sustainable and safe transportation system. So we're asking for 3 modifications. The first would be to increase the mitigation rate above 25%. Having developments or projects pay only 25% of their impact on our transportation system just isn't enough. The planning department originally recommended 33% or up to 33%, which we support for projects for which this would be feasible. Second, we're asking that the 50% reduction for grandfathering be reduced to 25% for projects that are already in the process, that have started the application process after July 1st. As several of you have mentioned, we support that. And finally, something that I haven't heard mentioned yet today is the parking. Parking being included in the square footage, which it's not in this current proposal unless it's a standalone parking garage, and we think that's really problematic because, as we know, the presence of parking generates trips by cars, and trips by cars are some of the most expensive trips in our transportation network. So we think that all parking should be included in the square footage for the transportation sustainability fee. So we applaud the program and the fee, and we hope you'll consider these modifications. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Luca. Mr. Lazarus.
Good afternoon, Supervisors. Jim Lazarus, San Francisco Chamber of Commerce. I want to remind all of you that these revenue streams for transportation and transit are part of a package. They're part of a package that we've supported over the years, such as this fee, such as vehicle license fee authorization that we worked with the Labor Council to get the legislature to pass and the governor to sign, sales tax for transportation, the bond issue for Muni, the first time in 60 years last year. And we need to look at these as that kind of package. The proposal that was defeated a couple of years ago went far afield, and that's why we joined a coalition that urged you not to pass that version. We support the version that came from SFMTA to the Planning Commission and to you this time, and we're open to some changes to that. We believe that small increases in the fee structure, tiered as suggested, might make sense. We believe that nonprofit educational institutions and their student housing projects should be exempt. We believe that the hospital fee should be delayed till at least 2030. We believe that, in fact, the suggestion of up to 1,500 square feet of very small project exclusion should be included in this legislation. But we urge you not to unravel, just in this piece of legislation, the coalition that's been built up on transportation and traffic improvements in San Francisco over the last decade. And we urge you to be reasonable in any changes you make to this legislation. Thank you.
Thank you. Next speaker, Mr. Yit.
Thank you. Bruce Lee, high call in the movie Enter the Dragon. Fire! A call for police officers to take on great dangers, for people in their special state of mind, for passion, destiny, and wisdom. That psychiatric works interfering people's transportation and housing security, for people in time of their personal adjustment, with other means of lock up with prison terms and personal unwanted and personal unflavored hospital stay. Striking works for alternate strategies of being difficult and being easy onto you to keep your mind unstable, which could be why or may just be totally necessary. Please allow weighted volume for state of mind with tolerance for people having true freedom, so one can enjoy the true developmental progress for one's destiny with daily works in good connection to worldly trend in time.
Thank you. If there's anyone else that'd like to speak on this item, please come at this time. Please come.
Good afternoon, Supervisors. I'm Alice Rogers. I live on South Park, and I am here to stand up for Jane Kim's suggestion that we increase the funding on the transportation sustainability fee. I live in Central Soma, and it really is ground zero for what happens when you don't plan for infrastructure years and decades in advance. Our congestion is beyond max. Our air quality is impossible. When I dust my house and vacuum my house weekly, there is so much black stuff on my floor, and what I breathe is 10 times exponentially more than that. This is a health issue as well as a congestion issue. So please seriously consider higher fees. James Fallows is speaking here around the corner tomorrow on civilization and infrastructure. He's been blogging on this topic for a good long time, and a point that he makes is that infrastructure projects are extremely disruptive in the short term, and they're expensive. But in the long term, they are even more disruptive and even more expensive. If people are worried about money, spend it now so you don't have to spend it later. Thank you.
Thank you. Next speaker.
Good afternoon, Supervisors. Steve Vettel, Thriller, Brown & Martell. I wanted to speak a bit about the grandfather date. I think the July 2015 date makes some sense and is fair. People were on notice that the ordinance was being adopted or was being introduced at that point. I urge you to keep the 50% credit for projects that were in the pipeline before that date. It's the only fair way that those projects can pro forma their projects be aware of the fee when they made their land deals. The city's interest is not to slow down or stop housing projects. The fee level proposed by SFMTA appears financially feasible, and urge you not to avoid any significant increases in that level. We may be in a bubble now, but these fees also need to make sense during the next bust. One reason we're in the housing crisis now is because job growth began rising in 2010, but new housing is just coming online now. We need to do better in the future and be sure housing pencils then when we're in a bust as well as penciling now, and so that projects can be built when the economy is weak. An unsupportable fee structure will hinder those efforts, and so I urge you to keep the fee level where MTA proposed it. If there's an increase, it ought to be very modest, and to keep the grandfather date, move the grandfather date up to July 2015, but keep it at 50% for projects that were in the pipeline before that. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Next speaker.
Good afternoon, Eric Tao, AGI, Avon. I'm a real estate developer, and I'm here today to just give a little bit of insight from our world. We work with the city, supervisors, planning department on a number of policy items. We used to build one-for-one parking. Now we build 50% parking. We have 100% bike parking, less car parking. We have electric car chargers. We have HEPA filters and different filters for all our units that are exposed to high traffic congestion areas that might have pollution. That's, to me, the way housing policy, transportation policy is done on the level with developers. I think if you give us a lot of run room, years in advance saying a fee is coming down, this will be amount, we can plan for it. Just like with every other policy reducing parking, increasing electric cars, reducing exposure to pollution. These are things we work together and try to come up with solutions that doesn't feel like a penalty. I would support not making large substantive material changes to the legislation as currently drafted. However, we will continue to work with the board and the city planning for long-range planning on how we can work together to help transportation in the city. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, just want to circle back to anyone is interested in speaking on this item. This is the last time we'll be taking public comment. Okay, public comment is closed at this time.
Madam Chair, I'd just like to note that Supervisor Kim has left the room, and President Breed has appointed Supervisor Avalos to sit in her place at this time.
Thank you, Mr. Clerk. Thank you for that point of information. Supervisor Avalos, welcome.
Thank you, Chair Cohen. I want to thank everyone from the public for speaking. I'm just going to insert one thing, and then I'll let my colleagues on the committee speak before me. If we're going to be looking at raising fee levels today, even though we could have a discussion about a lower fee or than what I might propose or another colleague might propose, whatever we do is going to trigger a continuance. And I believe that if we can indicate the highest fee level that we can go for, we wouldn't actually trigger another 2-week continuance. We would only be a one-time continuance, because then we would lower the fee if we were to set on a lower fee, and it would give us a little less time to actually go through deliberating on this ordinance. So I'd like to propose that if we are looking at a fee increase, that we actually go to the highest level that we can, and then members of the committee can indicate whether they would be accepting a lower fee at another time, but that would actually save us time moving forward as we go through the political process.
Thank you, Supervisor Avalos. Supervisor Weiner.
Thank you very much. So I wanted to, I appreciate Supervisor Avalos describing in detail his proposed amendments, and there are two I just want to respond to convey my perspective. The first, with respect to the increasing the per square footage for both residential and non-residential, as I understand it, Supervisor Avalos is proposing for residential to keep the per square footage rate at $7.74 for projects between 21 and 99 units, and then for projects of 100 units or more to raise it to $8.74, so by $1. So have I understood that correctly?
That is correct.
And that incremental increase of $1, would that be for the units above 100 units? So if you're building 200 units, you pay it on the second 100?
That's right.
Okay. So I support that, and I'll support that proposed amendment. On the non-residential, on the commercial, which has always paid TIDF, the proposal is to increase the per square footage rate by $3 for projects under 100,000 square feet, and by $6 for projects 100,000 square feet or more. That's a pretty massive increase. Particularly when we have two other impact fees coming down the pipe. I think the jobs housing linkage fee, which is I think a commercial impact fee, is going to be coming to us in the near future, as well as I know Supervisor Yee has proposed increasing the child care fee and also extending it to residential. So I am not prepared to support the $3 and $6. What I would support is, for commercial, is a $1 increase for projects that are 100,000 square feet or greater. And so that's what I'd be prepared to support on for commercial. And then for the grandfathering, I'll be honest, I struggled with this one. When I've done legislation, we've typically, for example, the recent water recycling legislation, we had a pretty generous grandfathering provision, particularly for projects that have been in the pipeline for some time, because these projects, they pencil out in a certain way, and the developers engage in a certain planning process with their team, with their funders. And so I've always been sensitive to that, for, again, not for the new projects, but for the projects that have been in the pipeline sometimes for years, because in San Francisco, of course, it takes at times an ungodly amount of time to get even a fully zoned project built. It can take years and years. And so particularly for projects that are somewhat deep into the process, to all of a sudden change the fees in the middle of the process, or to change the rules in the middle of the game, I think can be problematic. So I would be prepared today to support no grandfathering for projects that entered the pipeline after July 21st of this year. In other words, on the date that this ordinance was introduced, but not any other changes to the grandfathering provision. I think the grandfathering provision, which with the one exception I mentioned, I think strikes a very good balance in terms of whether you get a 50% discount or a 25% discount on the fees, depending on how long you've been in the process. But for projects that, once we introduced this legislation on July 21st, 2015, for any projects that entered the process after that introduction, they knew what the rules were. They knew what the rules were likely to be, given that the ordinance had been introduced, and we should not be creating incentives for developers to rush their project into a pipeline during the pendency of legislation. It's a very, very bad incentive to create. And so I will support eliminating grandfathering for projects introduced after the introduction date of this ordinance, but I'm comfortable with the rest of the grandfathering provision. And then I did mention the other, I believe, two amendments that I have distributed in terms of exempting nonprofit student housing, and also having it be an economic feasibility study every 3 years instead of every 5 years. And then I also indicated in terms of the elimination of the hospital exemption, I will not be supporting that change. I'll continue to support the exemption for the reasons I articulated before. I support increasing the trigger for PDR from 800 square feet to 1,500 square feet. I think that's a very good idea. And then for the area plan credit, I'm open to that, but maybe we can have some more discussion about it.
Okay, is that it?
Yes.
Okay, great. Supervisor Avalos?
Thank you. Well, let's. I didn't go into detail about my amendments, but I can do so. Supervisor Wiener did touch upon them, but let's talk about what we agree with. I can go with the exemption for all nonprofit post-secondary educational institutions, as Supervisor Wiener had called for, as well as the feasibility study that is in his second amendment. I'm also going to be okay with the PDR adjustment that Chair Cohen has put forward, as well as the area plan exemptions that she put forward as well. What was the other piece that you had, Supervisor Cohen? Oh, the removing of the hospital exemption. I'll be supportive of your amendment for that as well. I just want to, as we're talking about the hospital exemption, I do want to talk about what happened 3 years ago. 3 years ago, there was an effort to charge hospitals and nonprofits, so hospitals, including nonprofit hospitals and all nonprofits, that affected schools, that affected smaller institutions, that didn't have a lot of cash flow compared to some of our nonprofit hospitals. And that's where there was a lot of pushback from members of the Board of Supervisors that did not want to see nonprofits that didn't have a lot of cash flow to be paying the fee, and wanted them to be exempt. And so we actually talked about how we could study that as we were recrafting the Transportation Sustainability Program. And that's why we got to this now. We're at the crossroads right now, where I do believe that some of the hospitals that are big major chip generators, even though they're nonprofit hospitals, that they pay for the fees. So I'll be looking at eliminating the hospital exemption for the TSF. I was looking at a number of the CEOs and their salaries for a lot of these nonprofit hospitals, and they're very distinct from some of our local nonprofit hospitals, like Chinese Hospital. We have CEOs that are making upwards of $4.5 million as their base pay. That to me is a very different category from hospitals that are really working hard on charity care. So I will be not supporting a hospital exemption, and will be seeking to see that eliminated either here in committee or at the full board. And so I'll go into the amendments that I have. And Supervisor Wiener, you mentioned that on the tiered structure for the overall TSF, you said that the way that the amendment that I have crafted is that the increase to $874 per square foot would only apply to any units above 100 units. That's actually, I don't believe, is how I've crafted my amendment. I know that was a discussion that was made, but I didn't craft my amendment to be that. It would be the 874 would apply for the entire project for development that's over 100 units. So just so you're clear, I did indicate the opposite when you mentioned my amendment. So that's what's going to be before us today. And so I'll reiterate, as you point out, what my amendments were for residential, 21 to 99 units. We keep the flat fee of $7.74 per square feet. And then over 100 units, we would raise the fee to $8.74 per square feet over the entire project, not just the portion that's above 100. It's my amendment. So, and then for non-residential, where it's 800 to 99,999 gross square feet, to raise the fee to $3. I believe, Supervisor Wiener, you said that would be too high for you. The overall fee would be $21.04 a square foot. And then the other tier for non-residential would be over 100,000 gross square feet, to raise the fee $6 to $24.04 a square feet. The $21 and $24 square feet would be 24% of the nexus and 27% of the nexus, respectively. So that would be I think our first amendment that I expect we'll have some contention over. The second tiered approach would be for how we grandfather residential. I would like to see that, since we have been working on the Transportation Sustainability Program for a number of years, the TIDF was before us 3 years ago. Everyone who was in the pipeline, since that time has known that this has been a program that we've been working on, that residential was going to be part of the new TSP program, that we could anticipate what developers could anticipate what was going to be applied for their projects. So what I want to do is not make sure they're paying the full amount of the TSF, but but my amendment is that they pay 50% of the TSF if they submitted their projects before July 1st, 2014. If they submitted their projects after July 1st, 2014, that they would pay 75% of the TSF, and any projects that were submitted after July 21st, 2015 would pay the full amount. And I think that was the last piece, is what Supervisor Wiener, you said that you could support, or maybe it was Chair Cohen. That's on, and there's a similar approach as well for grandfathering non-residential. The same dates and the same percentages would apply. So 50% before July 1st, 2014, 75% after July 1st, 2014, and projects submitted after July 21st, 2015, again, the full TSF. So those will be the amendments I'll be seeking.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you, Supervisor Avalos, for those clarifications. In terms of the grandfathering, I completely understand and respect your point of view on it. I do think that in terms of when you're talking about a multi-year period, because the TSP, I mean, this has been in process for years, but it's also, as we see in this process at the board, it's always a little bit unpredictable exactly what's going to come out of the process. And so I don't know that anyone 2 years ago could have predicted this is going to be what's going to happen. This will be the grandfathering provision. This will be the per square footage. This will be this. This will be that. And so I think that the current grandfathering provisions do appropriately balance in terms of giving either a 25% discount or a 50% discount, depending on how long you've been in the pipeline. And we can agree to disagree on that one. In terms of, I appreciate the clarification on residential. So my concern with the way you've couched it is that, so if you are building 95 units, you're going to pay the lower fee, the $774. If you go up to 105 units, so do what we want, build additional units of housing, you're going to go up to $874, including for the first 100. So when you cross that 100 threshold, it retroactively increases the fee for everything. And so I think there will be, especially for projects that are maybe around 100, if you're debating is it going to be 90 units or 110 units, that might be enough to push you over the edge to stick with the 90 units, and it could potentially end up being a lower transit impact fee for the city because fewer less square footage is getting built. So colleagues, I have distributed to you 2 additional amendments which reflect what I indicated as being my alternative proposal to what Supervisor Avalos proposed in terms of the grandfathering and the per square footage fee. So those, I won't repeat them again because I described them before, but I did distribute them to you in writing, and I would ask the committee to consider them.
Okay, folks, we've got a lot of amendments on the floor. I personally have already articulated my amendments. I think we're clear, so I won't go over them. And I suggest we go amendment by amendment, and we can vote them up or down, in or out, okay? Are we fair enough? Okay, so first of all...
Maybe, Chair Cohen, we could start with what we know we have agreement on and just get those out of the way. You're probably going to propose that, but just in the spirit of collaboration, I thought I'd offer that as a...
I will do my best because actually I don't have my notes quite organized that way. What I'm going to do is I'm going to work from the TSF amendment sheet that you provided us, and I'm just going to go down the list. And when we get to where there's a competing priority between, for example, the residential and the non-residential fee that you're proposing, we'll take a vote there, and then we'll take a vote on what Supervisor Wiener is proposing. My apologies for not being able to group it all together. Okay. So the first amendment that's before us is to eliminate the area plan exemption. Can we have a roll call vote?
Please bear with me. I'm
not a problem. I know it's a lot.
This is a vote on the elimination of the area plan exemption as proposed by Supervisor Avalos. Supervisor Avalos.
Aye.
Avalos, aye. Vice Chair Wiener.
Aye.
Wiener, aye. Chair Cohen.
Aye.
Cohen, aye.
Thank you. And I think that I also made this is also one of my proposals as well, not in addition to Supervisor Avalos's. You said Supervisor Avalos proposed elimination plan area exemption.
Yes, that's the one that from his proposal.
Add my name. Add my name.
Oh, you would like to be a co-sponsor. Thank you.
Yeah.
Just for clarification, I'm given that Supervisor Cohen distributed it in writing. I'm assuming that maybe we should clarify. I thought I was voting on what you, Madam Chair, had distributed.
That's what I was trying to articulate. When you read it into the record, you said amendments proposed by Supervisor Avalos to eliminate area plan exemptions.
Like, I think Supervisor's office is more of an oral amendment than anything. But
I have written amendments that the city attorney has drafted. I believe they mirror what the same language that was in Chair Cohen's elimination of the hospital exemption or the project area exemptions.
So perhaps before we vote on each one, we can just be clear about whose written amendment we're voting on.
And we have would you like to rescind that previous vote and we can, so I can clarify the question? Or
Sure, let's rescind the vote. Is a motion to rescind?
Yeah.
Okay, unanimously approved.
Okay, then Madam Chair, I would move that we adopt the area plan exemption elimination per what the chair distributed in writing. That amendment that the chair distributed.
Just a clarification for the city attorney, that's the same language that is in the amendments that I have crafted. Maybe we can just have that clarified so we don't have to go through each amendment that way.
Yes, Deputy City Attorney John Givner. Same amendment. I think the only question for the clerk is who's making the motion to be so that can be reflected in the minutes. So at this point, it would be Supervisor Wiener's motion to adopt the amendment that Supervisor Cohen circulated.
Right, Supervisor Cohen's amendment.
That's correct.
I'm simply making the motion as a matter of process, and I'll support it.
This is the motion to adopt Supervisor Cohen's motion regarding the remove area plan residential TSF fee credit.
Roll call.
That's
correct. Roll call vote, please.
On that motion, Supervisor Avalos.
Aye.
Avalos, aye. Supervisor Wiener.
Aye.
Wiener, aye. Chair Cohen.
Aye.
Cohen, aye. The motion passes.
All right, thank you. Second amendment that I proposed is to increase PDR threshold. Can we have a roll call vote on that?
May I ask which amendment was that?
Sure, this is the second amendment that I introduced to increase PDR threshold.
Yes, I have that. Thank you.
Okay.
On motion regarding increasing PDR exemption threshold from 800 GSF to 1,500 GSF, on that motion, Supervisor Avalos.
Aye.
Avalos, aye. Vice Chair Wiener.
Aye.
Wiener, aye. Chair Cohen.
Aye.
Cohen, aye. The motion passes.
All right, thank you so much. Yeah. Third amendment would be the removal of the hospital exemption.
Second.
On the motion to regarding the removal of the hospital exemption,
Roll call vote, please.
Supervisor Avalos.
Aye.
Avalos, aye. Vice Chair Wiener.
No.
Wiener, no. Chair Cohen.
Thank you. Aye.
Cohen, aye. The motion passes.
Thank you.
With Supervisor Wiener voting no on the matter.
Okay.
Can we do the first amendments that Supervisor Wiener had passed out?
Yes, we can. Okay, so Supervisor Wiener has...
sorry, do you want me to...
I was going to say that Supervisor Wiener has passed out an amendment to increase the TSF rate. This is amendment that's going to be made on page 11, line 1, the TSF schedule.
I think perhaps we can do the less controversial ones first.
Okay.
So I would move, actually I'll just do two in one, move two amendments. The first to change the 5-year review of economic feasibility to 3 years, and the second one will be to exempt student housing that's being built by nonprofit post-secondary educational institutions, and so I move those two amendments.
Second.
I'm sorry. I'm in favor of one other amendment and not the other.
My apologies, Madam Chair. I will make them separately.
Thank you.
So the first one, I move adoption of the amendment to change the 5-year review of economic feasibility to 3 years.
All right.
On that motion, Supervisor Avalos.
Aye.
Avalos, aye. Vice Chair Wiener.
Aye.
Wiener, aye. Chair Cohen.
Aye.
Cohen, aye. The motion passes.
Thank you. We have
Excuse me.
The City Attorney.
Excuse me, Andrea Reyes-Esquire, Deputy City Attorney. I just wanted to clarify as to that motion. The Planning Commission's recommendation was to change the feasibility study from 5 to 3, and also to include the Planning Commission among the entities that may call for a revision sooner than that. I wonder if you want to take that second.
I'm sorry, you said to include the Planning Commission what?
as to the entities that may call for a revision sooner than 3 years or 5, as it's written now, because the current ordinance says the board, the mayor, can call for a new feasibility
Okay, I'm sorry.
at any time.
You are absolutely correct. In addition, it includes the planning commission for a body that can request it.
Right.
In addition, so but that is reflected in what I distributed. So I think the vote is valid. Okay. And then, Madam Chair, I move.
Can I pause you for a second? So I also have a request for an amendment. I didn't talk about it earlier, but it's around feasibility and exploring feasibility, adjusting fees for different geographic areas that actually have different land values. And that's something we wanted to include in future study as well. So it's not affecting necessarily what the size of the fee is, but looking to the future about how we might be a little more nuanced looking at different neighborhoods of San Francisco.
For all fees? It's just a study?
Yeah.
I'd be happy to support that.
I'm in favor of that too.
Okay.
Well, we need to take a motion on that, but so.
Okay.
Let's
Yeah,
finish with Supervisor Wiener and then
okay,
we'll
so
get back there.
Madam Chair, I move that we adopt the motion, I move that we adopt the amendment that I distributed in writing that would exempt from this fee all nonprofit post-secondary educational institutions building student housing.
A second.
Let's do.
So, sorry, one
John
more
Givner.
clarification on this, Deputy City Attorney John Givner. So the language Supervisor Wiener distributed, not limited to student housing only, although I understand that's the policy concern.
Yeah.
It'll exempt all post-secondary educational institutions.
Nonprofit.
Right.
Yeah, and that's very clear. This is only for
as part of the nonprofit exception.
Right. It's only,
It will not carve out post-secondary educational institutions.
Correct. And that is my motion.
All right, thank you. That motion has been made by Wiener, seconded by Avalos. Let's do a roll call vote. Mr. Clerk?
Yes, Supervisor Avalos.
Aye.
Avalos, aye. Vice Chair Wiener.
Aye.
Wiener, aye. Chair Cohen.
No.
Cohen, no. The motion passes with Chair Cohen voting no.
And just to clarify, I may study that and look at the different changes because I was expecting that we were looking at a specific, size for post-secondary, but I may change my vote. I doubt it, but just want to telegraph that.
Okay, fair enough. Let's take another amendment that Supervisor. Actually, let's just finish. No, let's take a minute on Supervisor Wiener's your next amendment.
Well,
wait, I want to go to an easy one. I want to go to amendment, the Sixth Amendment that Supervisor Avalos proposed, the study geographic-based fee structure. This is to direct the planning department and the controller to study the feasibility of making impact fees variable based on the economic feasibility of different areas of town. And so that is my motion.
Second.
And I'd like to do a roll call vote on this item.
Just to clarify, sorry.
Sure.
The city attorney does have an amendment for this.
This is regarding the economic feasibility study.
Mm-hmm.
On that motion, Supervisor Avalos.
Aye.
Avalos, aye. Vice Chair Wiener.
Aye.
Wiener, aye. Chair Cohen.
Yes.
Cohen, aye. The motion passes.
Thank you. Okay. Okay, so that leaves with us a few of the more controversial items. Creating a two-tiered structure for the overall TSF, both for residential as well as non-residential. Supervisor Wiener, as a member of this committee, I'll defer to you first to talk about your amendment.
Sure. So in terms of increasing the overall per square footage fee for this ordinance, I've distributed an amendment that keeps, for residential, it keeps the fee at $7.74 per square foot for residential projects up to 99 units. And then for projects of 100 units or more, it increases it by $1 to $8.74 per square foot for unit 100 and higher. And then for commercial, it would increase for commercial projects of 100,000 square feet or more, it would increase the per square footage fee from $18.04 to $19 and 4 cents. And so I move that amendment.
All right, the motion amendment is seconded by me. Is there any further discussion?
Just on that, I really feel that the higher dollar fee amount that would go to projects over 100 units should apply to the entire project. It is the entire project itself that contributes to trips and has an impact on our transportation system. And I think that higher fee should go for that. So I'll be voting no on that portion of it and proposing an amendment for the entire project to be at that higher dollar amount.
All right, thank you very much. Let's do a roll call vote. Are we clear on the motion, Mr.
Yes,
Clerk?
I do have a copy.
All right, let's
Yes,
hit it.
on that motion, Supervisor Avalos?
No.
Avalos, no. Vice Chair Wiener?
Aye.
Wiener, aye. Chair Cohen?
Aye.
Cohen, aye.
Thank
Motion
you.
passes.
Okay. Okay.
And then should I make my final?
Yes,
motion?
please make your final.
Okay, and then regarding grandfathering, I distributed the amendment that keeps the grandfathering intact, except that for any project for which that went into the pipeline after the introduction date of this ordinance, July 21st, 2015, would not receive any grandfathering benefit. But other than that, the grandfathering as contained in the ordinance would stay intact. So that's my motion.
All right, the motion is made, seconded by Supervisor Cohen. Let's do a roll call vote.
On that motion, Supervisor Avalos?
No.
Avalos, no. Vice Chair Wiener?
Aye.
Wiener, aye. Chair Cohen?
Aye.
Cohen, aye. The motion passed with Supervisor Avalos voting no.
Okay, thank you very much. Thank you, colleagues. Supervisor Wiener, that exhausts all your amendments? My amendments are exhausted. Supervisor Avalos, have we taken up all but
No,
one?
I just want to put into the record what I'm calling for, even though I might not get the votes for him.
Okay.
So just to clarify, on the last amendment we voted on was concerning residential and non-residential.
Correct.
Okay. So, I do have some agreement with part of what Weeder put forward. Certainly that we, any project that was submitted to the planning process after July 21st, 2015, both for residential and non-residential, I'm in agreement with that. But I would like to put out in the record that we voted on amendments that include before July 1st, 2014 date and an after July 1st, 2014 date. Before would be paying 50% of the TSF, and after would be 75% of the TSF for both residential and non-residential.
Thank you. Duly noted. I'm sure we will have a discussion again at the full board.
Okay, so I don't see a second for that motion. So my other motion, which I'm seeking a second for, is for residential units that the higher fee of $874 per square foot would go to the entire project for projects over 100 units.
I think, how does that differ from what?
What we approved right now was that only for projects over 100 units, only the units above 100
Right.
units would pay the higher fee.
And so now you want to include 100.
I want that $8.74 a square foot to go for the entire project, not just for the units over 100.
Okay,
And
thank you.
If I may, my concern is that when it's sort of like when we had the payroll tax. It kicked in when you had payroll of $250,000. So if you were a small business that had a payroll, and we saw this all the time, that had $250,000 $40,000 of payroll, you paid no payroll tax. If you hired that additional person that took you up to $275, you would then pay it on the entire $275, and it created a major disincentive for businesses to cross that threshold because it swept in everything from the first dollar. And so I think if we were to say that if you're at 99 units, you pay $774 per square foot. If you go to 101, you pay $874 on all 101 units. Anything around that 100 threshold will be guaranteed to be below 100. And I think we need more housing, not less. So I think it's better to make it a graduated fee, and that's what's in the amendment that we adopted.
And I just believe there'll be a lot of projects that will be well over 100. That will be important to be able to capture the entire amount.
All right, let's just put it to a vote.
Is there a second?
Yeah, I'll second that.
Thank you.
On that motion, Supervisor Avalos.
Aye.
Avalos, aye. Vice Chair Wiener.
No.
Wiener, no. Chair Cohen.
No.
Cohen, no. The motion fails.
Thank you. All right, colleagues, I think that exhausts all of the amendments.
There's one more
Oh, is there
that
one?
I'm going to give it the old college try for. Non-residential units or gross square feet of 800 to 99,999 to raise the fee to $21.04. That's a $3 increase, which still keeps it at 25% of the nexus. And then for non-residential with a gross square feet of over 100,000 and over to raise the fee to $24.04 a square feet, which is still 27% of the nexus. So I would like to see that voted on as well.
Okay, motion made by Supervisor Avalos, seconded by Supervisor Cohen. Let's do a roll call vote.
On that motion, Supervisor Avalos.
Aye.
Avalos, aye. Vice Chair Wiener.
No.
Wiener, no. Chair Cohen.
No.
Cohen, no. The motion fails.
Thank you.
Thank you for entertaining my emotions.
My pleasure.
So, Madam Chair, my understanding is that because of these changes, we will have to continue the item.
Yes.
So I move to continue this item 2 weeks to our next meeting.
I believe that's October 19th. Is that correct? In 2 weeks?
Yes, that is October 19th.
All right, motion made and approved unanimously. This motion passes. To continue the item for 2 weeks.
Yes. The matter will be continued for 2 weeks to October the 19th.
Thank you. Mr. Clerk, you ready to call item 4?
Yes. Item number 4 is a hearing on the status report prepared by the Department of Building Inspection and the Planning Department on the legalization of dwelling units installed without a permit per ordinance number 43-14 after 1 year of implementation pursuant to Planning Code Section 207.3.
Thank you. Supervisor Wiener is the author of item 4.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. Colleagues, this hearing is a hearing to look into, just to receive an update about the status of the in-law unit legalization effort. Several years ago, then Supervisor David Chu, the President of the Board of Supervisors, authored groundbreaking legislation that this board passed to create a path to legalize the tens of thousands of illegal in-law units in San Francisco. A significant number, tens of thousands of residents of this city live in illegal in-law units. They are some of our most affordable rent-controlled housing stock, and it's critically important during this housing crisis that particularly our lowest income and people who are most struggling are able to be stable in their housing. And so this legislation is incredibly important in allowing for the legalization of these units, for these units to be brought out into the sunshine and integrated into our housing stock. It's now been a few years since the legislation was passed. And as we understand it, we've been keeping track of it. There's been some units have come forward, but not as many as we would like. And to be clear, this hearing is about the legalization of existing in-law units, not about adding new in-law units. That's a separate discussion. And so we have with us the Department of Building Inspection to discuss what the status is, how many people have inquired, how many people have applied, how many units have gone through the process, and what, if any, impediments there are so that we can either fix and address those impediments at an administrative level or, if necessary, through any clarifying legislation. We want to make sure that more and more of these units are being legalized. And so, Madam Chair, we have Bill Strawn from the Department of Building Inspection, and if colleagues do not have any other comments, Madam Chair, I'd like to turn it over to him.
Please do. Thank you. Welcome, Mr. Strawn.
Thank you, Supervisors. It's a pleasure to be here. I'm also going to be joined in this very brief review of the unit legalization program by Kate Connor from the Planning Department. As Supervisor Wiener just outlined, this ordinance passed originally about the middle of May in 2014, so we're now at approximately 16 months into the program. It is a voluntary program that allows one unauthorized dwelling unit per lot to be legalized. It does suspend any code enforcement process around an existing notice of violation while the owner is pursuing the legalization. If the building meets any rent control requirements, that also does apply to the legalized unit. It cannot be sold separately as a condo or a tenancy in common. And the goal, as Supervisor Wiener very clearly stated, is to try and increase the total number of legalized units in code-compliant housing stock. The ordinance, as you can see, was 4314. It essentially established an eligibility criteria that the unit must have existed prior to January 1 of 2013, and that they would have to show proof of past tenancy, such as a lease or an NOV. No fault evictions with the rent board could not have occurred after March of 2014, and it would have to complete information as provided by DBI's G17 screening form. This was a detailed guideline to assist owners who were considering and looking into the legalization process. There is a rather complex workflow that you can see on your computer screen now. Suffice it to say that the staffs at both DBI and at Planning have been very happy to work with any owner taking this into consideration and seriously looking at possibly adding to our housing stock this way. Based on data that DBI has been keeping, we've had approximately 3,000 calls, expressions of interest, queries about it, both coming to the counters in the department or on the phone, and that probably averages between 50 and 80 a week since it passed. Out of that, we've ultimately had 239 permit applications submitted. 40 of those were permits that were pursuing NOVs, that is, they were units that already had been cited with an NOV. I think that's interesting only because that is about 17% of the total. So it's actually pretty clear to us so far that people aren't going to look into the process of legalization just to get rid of an existing NOV, at least not yet.
Mr. Strawn, if I may, so 239, is that applications for 239 units? 239 legalization applications have been submitted to DBI?
Right. Out of approximately the 3,000 queries that we've had over the past 16 months, we've actually had 239 applications submitted for permits.
I mean, of course, the better comparison is out of I've heard estimates of 30 or 40,000 illegal in-law units in San Francisco.
Well, I remember from Supervisor Chu's ordinance that the estimate was someplace in that sort of 30 to 40,000. Nobody seems to have a very hard number that we can accurately say, yeah, we know there are this many illegal units. But I do believe, and I'll defer to Kate Connor on this, that there are many units that, by waiving the density and the zoning that is part of the legislation, already would be conforming buildings. And so I think it's reasonable to assume that there might be as many as 25,000 that could qualify and go through this legalization process relatively simply. But I don't believe we've seen very many of those in the total number of permits that we've actually issued.
So I guess my question is, understanding that we don't know exactly how many illegal units are out there. Obviously, it's sort of the nature of the situation. There's no way to track it in detail. But if we have 3,000 people, so let's assume that's 3,000 units. For some of them, it could be more than one unit, but 3,000 units that have contacted, or 3,000 people with illegal in-law units that have contacted the department out of tens of thousands of units. That's a low number. And so if the first question is why you think that most people are not even contacting the department, particularly I know there's I'm sure fear about code enforcement occurring as a result, which of course legislation prohibits that. But the second thing is, of those 3,000 people who have interacted with DBI, only 239 have actually submitted permit applications, so less than 10%. And so the question is, why? That's the second question is, why have 90% not submitted applications? And I know you don't know the reason for each person, but I'm sure people have expressed this or that concern, and I'm curious to know why it is that so many people are not following up with applications.
Well, at least based on what our staff has reported back to me, there has been expressed concern over the fact that the unit would be permanently within rent control as one expressed item, even though
they're
already included. And toward that end, there may be some issue about how aware owners are about the program and are a little bit confused by what might apply or not. The other rationale that I've been told by our staff is they're concerned over the ultimate assessment value, that the tax bill could go up, when in fact the assessors made it very clear that it only applies to the new legalized unit if work had to be done in order to legalize it, and not necessarily the whole building. But be that as it may, that seems to be a concern that they have expressed.
One other issue that we've heard, and I actually, when the legislation was passed, I had concerns about this particular provision. The legislation allows for in a building for only one illegal unit to be legalized, and we know that there are many buildings that have more than one unit. And so if you own a building with, let's say, 2 illegal units, let's say they're both occupied, if you come forward and you can legalize one, that could potentially result in the requirement that you remove the other illegal unit. I'm wondering if you can comment on that particular issue.
Well, I can't comment on it on any specific conversation that I've had with anybody other than, as I said, I do think there may still be some confusion, despite the fact that both we and the planning department have had several workshops to try and walk through this process and explain to potential owners to participate why it might be worth participating. Another factor could be the cost. In terms of the total fees paid right now between planning and building, those are averaging about $3,400 or $3,500. And as you know, the legislation was recently passed in took effect in early September to waive those planning review fees for both building and planning. That's only been in effect about 1 month, so we haven't yet seen any bounce back from that. But over the longer term, that cost factor could be something that will increase the rate of participation.
Okay, and then the other issue that we've heard from some people is that in this legislation, and I know we've had this conversation in the context of the new in-law legislation that Supervisor Christensen and I authored, that if you do what we want you to do and you come forward, legalize units, make the investment, do all the things that you have to do to get the units legalized, your reward is that your building is permanently banned from the condo lottery. And we've heard from some people that they don't want to do that. And so that will prevent them from trying to legalize the unit. I'm wondering if you can comment on that.
Yes, I would say that is a third or fourth area that our staff has repeated back to us as a consideration that people have made. Perhaps at this time I could ask Kate to step forward and...
And we do have a little bit more of the presentation to follow. So good afternoon, Chair Cohen and Honorable Supervisors. Kate Connor, Planning Department staff. So there have been a total of 239 permits that have been submitted for the program thus far, and 62 of those permits have been issued. The Planning Department is currently reviewing approximately 93 or 94 of those permits, and DBI is currently reviewing 53 of the permits. So this is just a breakdown by supervisory district as far as where we are seeing the most permits for legalization. As you can see, permits filed in District 4 totaled 49 different permits. Also, District 11 has quite a few with 35 permits. This slide breaks down the review time for each agency. These timeframes have also improved dramatically. I would say now that planning staff is able to review a permit for legalization in under 2 months. This could also be attributed to just efficiencies in the processing as well as just complete permit submittals. So this breaks down the average permit cost per department. As Bill did mention, effective on September 15th or September 5th, the plan review fees for both planning and DBI have been waived. And then we'd also like to mention that the average construction cost to legalize an illegal unit is approximately $50,000. So certain challenges that we are seeing with the program. Although we've seen, approximately 240 permits to legalize illegal units, it's far less than what we had anticipated. This is due to a variety of different factors. During conversations with the public, we have heard that many property owners are reluctant to enter into the program because the cost to legalize an illegal unit is so high. Again, the average construction cost is about $50,000. If the unit's already existing, they have to be able to come up with that capital. Also, some buildings are not able to actually comply with the building code requirements. Others are also hesitant to legalize a unit because it would be very difficult to remove the unit in the future. In addition, we've heard that single-family dwellings have appraised at a higher per square foot value than a single-family dwelling that adds another unit. And then although we have learned, from the assessor's office that the change of use only becomes a reassessable event if there's new construction involved, there are people that are hesitant to enter into the program because of reassessment. And then finally, we've also heard anecdotally that there are tenant issues associated with proposed construction to legalize an illegal unit in terms of either relocation or construction. So some process improvements. We've definitely sped up our review time because street trees are now reviewed by the Department of Public Works. Also, the screening form has been amended multiple times to provide very kind of clear requirements for people that are entering into the program. Also, when planning approves the building permit, we give really kind of specific direction on how to apply for over-the-counter processing for the Department of Building Inspection, and that can definitely reduce the review time for DBI. And then also one of the major equivalencies that's been granted by DBI is regarding the sprinkler requirements. Before, when you would legalize or add a third dwelling unit, the occupancy of the building would change and trigger sprinkler requirements. And this equivalency only requires that the legalized unit, provided that it's on the ground floor, be sprinklered versus the entire building. And then also, as far as a process improvement, we've been able to waive the fees for DBI and planning. And also, DBI's website has been a really great wealth of information. So far, we have 9 legalized units that have been totally completed. And so this concludes our presentation, but we're definitely available for any questions.
I just want to follow up with you on some of the discussion I had with Mr. Strawn. Do you have any, I know you indicated some of the areas that where people have expressed concern, but there's a broader issue of the fact that only 3,000 people have contacted the department to even inquire of tens of thousands of illegal units. Is that because people don't know, or people are fearful, or people don't want to legalize? Do you have any sense for why it is that only maybe 10% have even bothered to anonymously contact the department?
I think it's a combination of different issues. I think initially it took a little while for the program to catch on just because people did not know about it. I think a lot of people are now learning about the program, but I do think that the cost is a really big issue as far as just that cost of construction. There's not much of an incentive for people to enter into the program if they're already renting the unit. So being able to come up with that capital to go through the legalization process, I think is daunting for many property owners.
And then in terms of the multiple unit issue, is that something that you're hearing from people?
I have heard it from a few different citizens. It's not an overwhelming complaint, but I've definitely heard it, for sure.
Okay. And then in terms of the issue I raised with the reward for going through this process and paying all this money to legalize your unit, bring it formally into rent control, even though the city considers it rent control already, that your reward is that your building gets a scarlet letter and is permanently banned from the condo lottery. How about that issue?
We have, or at least from planning staff, we have heard that comment. Definitely, we've also heard that it's just so difficult to even remove the unit if you wanted to revert to a single-family dwelling. So I think both of those we've heard somewhat equally. But it's not necessarily an overwhelming comment that we've heard. Right.
Well, and in terms of overwhelming, not that many people have even commented, so it's a little bit hard to know. And so the fact that of the 3,000 inquiries, only 239 have moved forward, is that for the other 90%, did they just decide this isn't for me, or are they still thinking about it? Do you have any sense? Obviously, you can't read their minds, but in terms of the feedback you're getting?
I think that there are quite a few people that are definitely considering it and just trying to figure out how to actually start that process, either retain some sort of design professional or an engineer to kind of help them flesh out the screening form and figure out if it's something that's really financially viable for them. But it is very hard to tell why we've only had that.
And are you seeing any kind of acceleration? Are we seeing, like, per week or per month, the number of inquiries or applications? Is it more now than it was, say, a year ago? Because the hope is that awareness will go up, that perhaps with some of the process improvements, people will be more comfortable entering the process. Any sense for that?
I would say definitely when the program started, it was a very slow start. We definitely saw a pickup right around the 1-year mark. And then it did drop off a little bit, but now we're seeing another increase in permit submittals.
Okay, thank you very much. Does that complete the presentation?
Yes.
Okay, Madam Chair, I think Supervisor Avalos may have a comment.
Yes.
Just a quick question. Given that we have tens of thousands of units that are unpermitted in the city, possibly between 25 and 40,000, 45,000, and we have, only hundreds that have actually looked at participating in a program. What does the city have in its disposal for incentives that will bring people forward? Is there anything in place?
Bill Strawn, DBI. I would say that the new fee waiver is definitely the kind of incentive that I think may stimulate participation rate again. As Kate was just saying, it is very difficult, and as Supervisor Wiener was alluding to, with these low participation numbers at this time, it's hard to get a very strong fix on why people are holding back. I would say that both departments are very amenable to trying to walk people through the project and to help them get there. So it's certainly not for lack of providing very explicit guidelines and a willingness to work with people. It may be that we just need to do a little better outreach effort so that more people realize this opportunity is right here and right now.
Is the Mayor's Office of Housing involved in any way to help create any kind of incentive? Are you aware of?
I am not aware.
Are you aware of the Housing Trust Fund having? Are you aware of any discussion about the Housing Trust Fund that was approved by the voters in 2012 as being available to have any impact on incentive creation?
I am not.
This is an area of law that I had an impact on, but also probably didn't have the impact I had expected to have. We had crafted the Housing Trust Fund in the middle of budget season when I was on the Budget Committee, and I was also working on gross receipts tax at that time. And I had submitted language clearly that was actually creating a portion of the Housing Trust Fund called the Housing Stabilization Fund. I originally it was called, what I had called for was the Homeowner Stabilization Fund. And then when the language had to change, it was changed to the Housing Stabilization Fund. It fell under off my radar at that point, which is, a moment of shame for me. But the language that's here, and I'll read it, does allow for some uses to be available to households to do what I believe to help cover the cost of legalization. So here's the language in Housing Trust Fund. It's no later than July 1st, 2018, the city shall appropriate $15 million from the Housing Trust Fund to a program that provides loans to households earning up to, that's the wrong one. I tried to take a picture of it because I couldn't read it very well on my computer screen. I'm very sorry. Here we go. So no later than July 1st, 2018, the city shall appropriate up to $15 million from the Housing Trust Fund to a program that provides funds to households earning up to 120% of area median income for use as assistance to reduce the risk of current occupants of a loss of housing and/or to help current occupants make their homes safer, more accessible, more energy efficient, and more sustainable. As soon as practical, the Mayor's Office of Housing shall implement and develop a manual for the Housing Stabilization Program. So I actually I put that language in, and it's kind of vague. It was made a little more vague by the Mayor's Office as they're moving to the ballot to allow for households that want to seek some subsidies to bring their unpermitted units into compliance and make them energy efficient, safer, and more accessible to people. Not one single dollar has been used, not one bit of effort has been made by the Mayor's Office of Housing to see that these funds can be available for that program. I want to bring it to your attention to see if you can meet with my office, with the Mayor's Office of Housing, to how to move forward with this program. I've mentioned a number of times the Mayor's Office of Housing, and they say, yeah, we'll get on it, and they never do. So I want to invite you to come to my office to help work on creating this incentive
Thank
program.
you. Yes, we'd be happy to do that, of course. Yes.
All right, thank you very much. Is there any further discussion on item 4? Seeing none here, let's go to public comment. Public comment is open for item number 4. If anyone would like to speak, you have a moment at this time. Please come to the podium. Seeing none, no member of the public has stepped up. Public comment is closed. Supervisor Wiener, what would you like to do with this item?
Thank you, Madam Chair, for scheduling this item today, and I want to thank the departments for coming out and updating us. I think what this hearing has shown is that we have our work cut out for us. We have to continue to raise awareness in the city so that owners of buildings with illegal units, first of all, know that they have the option of coming forward, that they know that they can make an anonymous inquiry, and that if they make an inquiry and it turns out that they do not move forward, that this will not somehow trigger a code inspection that causes them to have to remove the unit, and that is very specifically prohibited in the legislation. We have to make sure that the process at planning and DBI and the other departments continues to be more and more efficient, and that people understand that they can move through this process in a reasonable way and they're not going to get stuck in a lengthy city process. And I do think that we need to continue to take a look at the legislation and see what are potential obstacles in the legislation and whether that needs to be changed. We want to have more of these units legalized, and I think that's a shared goal. So, Madam Chair, I will move to file this item.
All right, there's a motion to move this to file this item. This motion, thank you very much. This motion passes unanimously. Please file. Mr. Clerk, I'd like to call back item 3 just for clarification. The city attorney is going to offer some just some clarification on a few of the one of the amendments that we discussed earlier today. Deputy City Attorney.
Deputy City Attorney John Givner. So there were 2 amendments on item 3. As we piece all these together and put together the version that will be on the agenda on October 20th, we just wanted to clarify and make sure that the committee is on the same page about what those votes were. One is on the grandfathering piece, Supervisor Wiener's amendment that changed the grandfathering provision so that for residential units, the full TSF would be paid for projects after July 21st, 2015, projects that filed a development application after July 21st, 2015. The committee, I don't believe, spoke about non-residential non-residential projects in that discussion, but Supervisor Wiener's amendment does not increase the fee for non-residential projects after July 21st, 2015. It would leave that grandfathering piece in place. So non-residential would pay the TIDF until the effective date of this.
Right, and once the ordinance is in effect, commercial will pay the higher rate for the larger projects.
Right. Just only on the grandfathering provision.
Right.
Just trying to clarify what that amendment was.
And I think part of the rationale there is also that commercial is already paying the TIDF, whereas for residential, it's a new thing. And so that was the rationale.
And then the second piece, and again, I just going back to these so that we can be sure we draft it accurately to reflect the committee's intent, was on the fee schedule. The committee discussed how to deal with the situation where there were 99 units or over 100 units. Does the higher level of fee apply to the entire project, or does it only apply to the 100th unit and above? And the committee voted 2-1 to apply the higher fee only to the 100th unit and above. The committee didn't expressly discuss how to deal with non-residential units, and so our understanding of Supervisor Wiener's motion and the discussion is that we would apply the same rule to non-residential units, to non-residential projects where up to 99,999 gross square feet, we'd apply the lower fee, and for all square feet above that, we'd apply the higher fee. And just again, wanted to get that on the record and make sure that that was the committee's intent when you made those votes.
Yes, and that was our intent when we put the drafting request in. So if this language is not sufficiently detailed, then the city attorney should, I think we need to go back and just clarify that. But that was the intent, and that's correct.
All right, thank you very much.
Well, thank you for that clarification, Supervisor Avalos. I think we're all on the same page. Okay, thank you. So, could you call the next item on the calendar?
That completes the agenda.
All
We've
right,
gone through all 4 items.
Thank you very much, everyone. This committee is adjourned.
SF Gov TV, San Francisco Government Television.